We are going to start. First of all, thank you very much to the organizer for inviting me to the lecture and pressing the word of the Cycle Guiding Committee. Well, the first question is why we need a cycle dating committee, because we think that the reference cycle is
the microphone.
This one.
Yes. Yo tengo el otro.
Okay, thank you. So the idea is that we think that determining the reference cycle is crucial. It's crucial.
Tienes que encenderlo.
Sorry, it's crucial to for different point of view. For instance, for policy makers to design public policies, to offer a guide for investors and for the academia, because, for instance, determine the cause of recession, test competitive economic theories, or analyze the characteristics of cyclical phases, for instance, duration, intensity. Well, but the problem is the business cycle turning points, the date at which the economic switches from expansion to recession or from recession to expansion are not directly observable. Okay. For this reason, there are several committees that carry out these tasks. In US, the very well-known NBO provides reviews of the US business cycle since the end of the 19th century. More recently, in Europe, the CEPR, and for this, consequently, in the Spanish Economic Association, decided in December of 2012 create the Spanish Business Cycle Dating Committee. Well, what does the Cycle Dating Committee do? Okay, this offers, okay, really the first official dating of the business cycle in Spain was published in April of 2015, and the committee provides some historical dating of the Spanish business cycle at quarterly frequency since the 70s. Okay, and the committee considers a variety of serious economic indicators apart from the GDP, or not the GDP. Okay, in progress, the idea is to offer a chronology from an historical point of view, with an historical perspective, and at the monthly frequency. Okay, also the committee provides a monthly indicator of or index of economic activity in real time. Well, here you can see some capture screens of the website of the committee in the website of the association. Okay. This one, another one, and this is the last chronology. You can see here that the last peak was in the last quarter of 2019. That marked the start of the recent crisis. Okay, so the current task is to determine what is the trough. Okay, the trough that marks the end of the COVID crisis. Well, the facts are very well known because the restriction of the movement of people and the close of the international markets, okay, to face the pandemic, provoke and fall in the GDP. Okay, remember that this fall in the GDP in Spain in the first quarter of 2020 was 5.4. Okay, and in the second quarter, as a result of the dependence of the Spanish economy of the tourists and other activities related to the movement, the fall was even greater. Okay, in this case, 17.7. Okay, for this reason, the Cycle Dating Committee of the Spanish Economic Association determined that the new peak of the Spanish economy happened in the last quarter of 2019. Okay. Indicating that the first quarter of the recession was the first quarter of 2020. Okay, well, but As a result of the lifting of the most restrictive measure, the Spanish economy reached an important increase, very impressive increase in the third quarter of 2020, 60.8. Okay, with all the economic indicators that we have in this moment, okay, the committee have examined, have analyzed these indicators, okay, and point to the fall of the recession that began in the 2020, in the first quarter, in the second quarter of 2020. Okay, so in view of this evidence, the cycle dating committee of the Spanish Economy Association determines that the new trough of the Spanish economy occurred in the second quarter. Some question. Usually, GDP downtown of 1 or 2 quarters in duration is too short. It's too short to determine whether the evidence reveals a generalized structural slowdown of the economy or a transitory shock. But this recession is specific, is different. Okay, and so we consider that the global, considering the global nature of the pandemic, its effect on all sectors of the economy and its persistence make this dating an exception with respect to the previous cycle dating. Okay, therefore, the recession from the health crisis is the shorter, the deepest, and most internationally synchronized of all recent recession in the Spanish economy. Okay, well, this is a summary of the previous results. Only 2 questions. Once the recession has been dated in the two quarters of 2020, the fall of the GDP has been 22%. Okay, so the recession started in the first quarter 2020, and the peak dated in 2019 in the last quarter. Okay, and has lasted only 2 quarters, okay, until the drop that we just take in the second quarter. Okay, from a monthly point of view, okay, we consider that the peak could have occurred in February and the drop in April. So the real duration could be 2 months, only 2 months. Okay, well, here we can see some indicators: GDP, the fall, and the recovery. With respect to the recovery, we would like to note that this is important, that determination of the trough doesn't imply that the economy has reached the previous level, with respect to the previous peak. Okay, we can see in the previous recession that the economy, when the trough is determined, the economy didn't reach the previous level. Okay, this is important because a commonplace in the media these days is when Spain will have reached the pre-crisis level of activity. Okay, that is independent of the trough. Okay, well, indicators of by sectors, industry, service, construction, and employees, all of them point the trough in this day. Indicators of the demand side, the same. Monthly indicators of activity, this one the same. The only exception, because is some indicators related to employment because of the effect of the layoffs. Okay, and finally, I would like to mention that in this cycle, in this meeting, meeting, we have considered indicators that have no typical indicators in this cycle literature, such as the mobility. We have used indicators of mobility. We have used indicators from Google and from in this case. Okay, well, this is a summary of the results. Okay, I'm going to repeat the main conclusions. And here we can see the composition of the committee. Well, now I would like to introduce the keynote speaker, Gabriel Pérez Quirós. Okay, really, for me, it's truly an honor to have the opportunity to introduce Gabriel Pérez Quirós. Next year, in 2022, the next year,
will mark the 25th anniversary of the paper Output Fluctuation in the United States, what has changed since the early 80s. That finally was published in American Economic Review in 2000. One of the most influential works on business cycles, literature, at which changed our view of the business cycle by introducing the concept of great moderation, a concept that is still valid today despite such abrupt crises as the Great Recession and the Great Lockdown. Gabriel was one of his authors. Let me briefly revise with you the Gabriel impressive CV. Gabriel earned a PhD in 1996 at University of California, San Diego, under the supervision of Professor James Hamilton. He has worked for many prestigious institutions like the Fed of New York, the World Bank, the United Nations Organization, the Bank of Spain, and European Central Bank. Currently, he is in the Financial Stability and Macroprudential Policy Department of the Bank of Spain. Thanks to the work, to the research of Gabriel, we know more about topics like the analysis of business cycle, the international transmission of economic fluctuation, the role of economic indicators in the day-to-day analysis of economic development, and the monetary policy strategies of central banks. He has published his research in top academic journals such as American Economic Review, Journal of Econometrics, Journal of Finance, Journal of Econometrics, International Economic Review, and a long list. Gasemetrics, according to Google Scholar, he has almost 7,000 citations, and according to REPEC, he is in the top 5% of the best economists around the world. I have introduced many invited speakers, but in different meetings, but I think Gabriel is has one of the most impressive research backgrounds I have ever seen. One final personal note is also a great satisfaction for me that he has honored me by being his co-author and friend. Working with Gabi is exciting and anything but boring. Okay, well, this is all, and Gabi, when you want, he is going to present macroprudential, the paper titled Macroprudential Policy, Risks, Business Cycle, and Long-Term Growth, where the trade-off.
Okay.
Do you need this?
No, I haven't. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. No sé si es este. No, este no es. El otro.
No.
El otro lo tengo. No, cuando queden 10 minutillos me vas diciendo, ¿vale? Me controla el tiempo. Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. What I'm going to talk about is macroprudential policies, risks, business cycle, and long-term growth. What is the trade-off, if any? Okay, I want to mention that the possibility that there are no trade-offs. Okay, obviously the usual disclaimer applies, and then what I'm going to talk is about the line of research. Most of the research has been done with Lola, actually. Growth and Risk Trade-off is a paper with Luke Lavin and Lola. We have a summary on the effectiveness of macroprudential policies, but we have another paper on macroprudential policies we trust with Lola also. And I'm going to mention another paper that we had together, the failure to predict the Great Recession. Okay, then basically it's a line of research that I have done with her. But before I start talking about economics, I want to thank. Okay, I want to thank you for the invitation. I was really touched by the invitation by the Spanish Business Cycle Committee, but also I want to thank the Spanish Economic Association and actually the organizers, because this meeting, the symposium is the first meeting where I started, my first meeting as a professional researcher. When I came from San Diego, I always stop here to present during Christmas time, as you were saying before, and it was kind of visiting the family. Okay, then I actually, when I started here, I met David, Ines. It was the Autónoma in Barcelona. Okay, and then it was just like visiting the family, and actually I have been coming very often. But coming here again without the load of the job market, because I came very often to make interviews for the job market, but coming here again without this loading of like having a lot of interviews and enjoying the possibility of like having 2 days here, it was like, mommy, it was all my memories about coming in 1994. That was the first time that I came. I mean, I have revived all these feelings, and looking at the familiar faces is again as visiting the family. Okay, then I want to thank everybody, but in particular all the effort that were made, and actually for a long time it was always in Autónoma in Barcelona, all the efforts that were made at that time when all these things were not so common as they are right now. Okay, and actually they made me as a researcher, because it was like the only opportunity that I had at the beginning to present my work. Okay, then thank you very much to all of you for the invitation and for all the work made through the years. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, then before talking about the details, I want to basically summarize, because I mean, working in a central bank and talking about macroprudential policies is like, okay, the natural thing, but a lot of people perhaps do not know even what we're talking about. No? Let me just show you this graph. When we have here the recession in the Spanish economy, this is GDP growth rate, okay, and the big recession. And this is the evolution of credit to GDP. Credit to GDP is the most standard way of analyzing basically the credit condition in an economy. Saying like credit obviously is an integrated of order one, it's non-stationary, and you want to relate to the evolution of GDP. And as you can see here, okay, there is a huge boom in credit to GDP. Actually, this is the beginning of the great financial crisis, okay? And then basically here, what you have seen here is an accumulation of credit to GDP over time, okay? And actually the results of that thing, I mean, seems very dramatic. Then the problem with macroprudential policy, actually, this is just an example. There are a lot of examples of different countries, and actually a lot of controversy of up to what point this situation is the cause of this situation. We have a paper analyzing this thing and the problems, the econometric problems of analyzing those things. But in particular, there is a lot of evidence that all these disequilibria accumulated over time matters for this kind of outcome. Okay, and the problem with macroprudential policies is like you have to be aware of the possibility of this situation way before. Okay, let's say 5 or 6 years before is when you have to think about all these things. Then naturally it's like talking to pensions. Okay, way before anything happened, you have to say, no, something will happen in the future, and you are like, yeah, whatever. Okay, and then this is kind of the same thing. Okay, you have to cut the music way before things happen. It's not like monetary policy or fiscal policy. When a shock happens, you react to that. Here you have to think way in advance about the possibility that something may happen in the future in order to basically in order to stop the music. No? Then what is the problem with these things? Like actually, I like to compare macroprudential policies with basically using similar analysis to medicine. Okay, let me just talk about this example. In general, people get sick. If you are infected by a virus, how acute is going to be your disease depends on how weak is your immune system. We know a lot about this thing, the medicine and the treatment that you follow, and the possible side effects of this treatment. Okay? In economics, it's kind of the same thing. Economists get sick. If you get infected by a recession virus, how acute is going to be your recession depends on the disequilibria when you enter in a recession, the measures taken by the policymakers, and the possible side effects of these measures. Then let me compare macroprudential policies with preventive medicine. Okay, when you talk about preventive medicine, basically what you want to do, and we know a lot about this thing now. Okay, we want to reinforce the immune system, all the people and the population in general. Okay, and then how do you reinforce the immune system? You do two things. You increase the resilience. Basically, you get the coronavirus, you are going to be less sick. That's why you get the vaccinations. Okay, and you try to avoid that people get but try to avoid the spread of the disease. Okay, you are trying to avoid you try to make sure that less people get affected by the virus. Then you do two things. You reinforce the resilience of the people, and you try to avoid the spread of the virus. Okay, and what do you do with that? What do you want to do? You want to avoid the frequency and acuteness of the sickness. Okay, but also you want to maintain strength and dynamism in the healthy days. Okay, obviously we can stop the sickness. We go back to home, everybody's home. Okay, and we never go out in the next 200 years. Okay, the virus is going to stop. Okay, but perhaps this is not what we want. Okay, what do we do with macroprudential policies? We do the same thing. Okay, we try to reinforce the financial system. Okay, why? Because, and what do we do in order to reinforce the financial system? Make sure that we increase the resilience. If there is a shock, it's going to be less affected. And we avoid vulnerabilities like the ones that we have seen over time. Okay, basically this increase in credit to GDP is like, you know, like the virus spreading all over. Okay, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the economy. Okay, and what do we want to do with this? We want to do the same thing. We want to avoid the frequency and acuteness of the recessions and maintain the strength and dynamism in the expansions. Okay, we want to do the same thing. And there is also something in common. Preventive medicine and macroprudential policies, they talk about communities and population. They are not directly, okay, I'm going to check this bank or I'm going to check that bank. We are talking about, in general, communities and populations. But also there is something in common, and we are very aware of that. There are benefits and costs of imposing these policies, as we are suffering with the COVID. No, there are benefits and costs of you know, having everybody at home forever. There are benefits and costs, and these are the things that we are trying to measure here. Okay, then, by the way, I didn't mention what are macroprudential policies in general. I will mention some of them, but in general, all these measures, like when you try to buy a house, and they tell you, I'm not going to give you 100% of the value of the house, I'm going to give you only 80%, 70%, 60%. Okay, basically they are trying to stop the evolution of credit. Okay, they want to maintain credit low in order to make sure that you don't buy a house, because it's pretty risky that you buy a house at 100% or 120%. On the other side, there are other type of macroprudential measures saying like, okay, we increase the capital requirements of the banks when they give credit, just to make sure that, you know, they try to stop giving credit because it is costly for them to keep increasing credit. Okay, then these are the kind of measures that we are talking about. Okay, then what is the goal and the objective of the macroprudential policy? The ultimate objective, this is ESRB, this is the European Systemic Risk Board wording. The ultimate objective of macroprudential policy is to contribute to the safeguarding of the stability of the financial system, okay, as a whole. This includes strengthening the resilience of the financial system and decreasing the build-up of the vulnerabilities. Two things, resilience and vulnerability is the same thing with vaccination, okay? Make sure that if you are sick, you are less sick, but trying to make sure that less people is sick, okay? Thereby ensuring a substantial contribution of the financial sector to economic growth, okay? And here there is a word that I want to emphasize, economic growth. At the end of the day, the only thing that we want is to make sure that the economy grows in a steady path, okay? But we want to increase economic growth, okay? That's the final goal. Because at the end of the day, we are not supposed that we are able to make sure that the financial stability is higher. We have a very sound financial stability, but there is no relation between financial stability and growth, then who cares, okay? Then basically at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to make sure that people live happily after, okay? Okay, then in the middle of the macroprudential policies is financial stability with two things, strengthening resilience and smoothing financial cycle. And these are the instruments that we have. These are capital-based measures, borrower-based measures. These are the, okay, I don't give you a loan unless you give me 80%, 20% of the value of the house, okay? These are borrower-based. These are measures implemented to the borrowers. And these are capital-based measures to the banks, okay? You give a loan, you have to have these capital requirements, okay? Make sure that we control the evolution of credit over time. And the final thing is contribute to economic growth, okay? Then, just as I said, two type of measures, strengthening resilience, smoothing, okay? Capital-based measure in particular for strengthening resilience, increasing the ability of banks to suffer or to make sure that the banks are able to suffer a bigger shocks. Okay, on the other side, smoothing financial cycle, okay, basically borrower-based measure, but at the end of the day, in the middle of everything is the evolution of credit. The more important variable that we want to control with macroprudential policies is credit. Then, as you can see, there is a big difference between monetary policy that is trying to control inflation, and here we have a new animal, okay, a new kid on the floor. Now we want to control credit, only credit. The only goal of macroprudential policies is to control the evolution of credit. Okay, what is the role of credit in the economy? There are a lot of papers that actually, if we go back to the graph that we had before, okay, the first graph that I presented you here. What is the role of credit in the economy? What is the role of credit in the economy? Okay, obviously, the role of credit in the economy is very clear. Okay, when you have too much credit, and as I said, there are tons of papers that analyze this thing in millions of perspectives, but the idea is credit is bad. Too much credit is bad. That's the message that we receive from the literature. Okay, then basically the role, you analyze the role of credit, you get, too much credit is bad. Okay. Episode of rapid credit growth, forecast recession, and financial crisis. A lot of papers. Credit crunches associated with deeper recession and slower recoveries. A lot of papers. As I said, we are very critical on that, but at the end we get the same conclusion in a very critical way. Okay, and actually let me tell you something else, that this is really important. You know this paper by Adrian, Growth at Risk. This the famous Growth at Risk. What is the idea of growth at risk? He's saying like the idea of Adrian and Tobias Adrian and Goronichenko and Domenico Iannone in American Economic Review. The idea is financial conditions matter, but financial conditions matter not only for financial condition, basically credit. The indicator that they have basically is 60% of the indicator is basically credit. The idea is credit matters because it affects future growth, okay, in particular, but credit matters in the left-hand side of the distribution, okay? Saying like, deteriorating financial conditions are associated not only with a decrease in the mean of GDP, credit matter because it affects GDP, but also increased volatility. Therefore, it's not only that the future growth is going to be low, but the volatility is going to be low. Then you are going to, it may be that you have terrible outcomes when credit goes up, okay? However, upside risks are low even when there is an improvement in financial conditions. Then not having too much credit, having credit under control, doesn't seem to have such an effect on the future growth. Then basically it's very asymmetric. Credit is bad, make sure that you control credit. And if you control credit, at the end of the day, in the other side of the distribution, there is not such a strong relation between controlling credit and what is going to happen with your GDP. Okay? Actually, this is so important that all the national central banks, all the authorities have changed their view about the economy, and they have invested a lot in creating macroprudential policy departments like the one where I am working right now, okay? Actually, the Bank of England, for example, they claim macroprudential policy should seek to avoid the type of boom and bust cycle in the supply of credit and liquidity that has marked the recent financial crisis. IMF, credit to GDP growth is a particular reliable indicator of recession. Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, excess aggregate credit growth has often been associated with the build-up of systemic risk. This credit is like, wow, the bad guy, okay? Conclusion, if credit is so bad, okay? If credit expansion primarily downside risk and have limited upside risk, the ones should exploit macroprudential policies to tame the credit cycle. Saying, if credit is so bad and there is nothing happening if you control credit at the maximum, because it seems that on the other side of the distribution, credit matters, but not in a crazy way. if credit is so bad, the best thing that you have to do is to control credit. Okay. Okay. Yes, it is true that you have to take your medicine. It's like pensions. Okay. If pensions are so bad, okay, you have to control pensions. Yeah, you have to take your medicine. It's nothing. Nobody likes to control credit because in the short run you are going to have something like this. Okay, this is the import response function when you control credit, when you have a negative shock on credit. And yes, obviously GDP goes down, total credit, when you increase macroprudential policies, total credit goes down, total, okay, yeah, but okay, short run, okay, at the end of the day, it's good for your health, okay? This is the idea. Control credit to the maximum because it's good for your health. Okay. Only a few papers, very marginal, talk about kind of a positive growth, positive side of the credit, okay? Basically, some papers talk about financial deepening as possibly associated with long-term growth, okay? And there's evidence that expansions without credit, what are called creditless recoveries, are not so great, okay? They have lower growth rates, okay? But in general, it seems that, you know, the weight of credit being the bad guy is like n times bigger than the positive side of credit. Okay, then what do we want to do? What do we want to do? First of all, check that macroprudential policies can actually have an effect on smoothing the financial cycle. Okay, and then basically saying like, okay, up to what point do we want to really control the evolution of credit over time? Do we want to get to the maximum? Do we want to basically make sure that no banks give any credit because at the end of the day, credit is bad, okay? Okay, then for the first part, we have a paper that we do something called meta-analysis, okay? Meta-analysis, basically we review the literature and we analyze that most of the papers have credit in the left-hand side, okay, and macroprudential policies in the right-hand side with different variations, okay? A lot of variables to control, okay? And at the end of the day, we basically review the literature using meta-analysis, okay? And we basically find that there is a relation between macroprudential policies and credit, okay? Since the macroprudential policies have control on credit, even controlling for publication bias, okay? Basically, you are more likely to publish your paper if you go to the right of the credit is bad. Okay, basically macroprudential policies have a positive effect. There is a publication bias. This is the publication bias. Okay, sorry. Okay, basically this is just a graph of the basically this is something really cool. Okay, saying like these are the results in this is the beta coefficient in the literature when you have in the left hand side, and this is the standard errors of the coefficient in the y's. Okay. Then basically, if you are as likely as published bad results are good results, okay, this will be spread all over, okay? Basically, because if you have a positive result, okay, but you have a lot of standard errors, you publish your paper and whatever. If you have a negative result and you have a huge standard error, your paper is published. But if you have a positive result, you throw it away, okay, and you say like, whatever, okay? No, we don't do that, but other people do that, okay? Okay. Okay, but there is a publication bias, but even controlling for this publication bias, there is some role of credit, okay? Then it seems that macroprudential policies have an effect on credit, okay? In particular, basically, we find that an increase in macroprudential policies in one amount increases credit in 1% in the next year, okay? Finally, then we have the first part. Macroprudential policies have some control on credit, even controlling for publication bias that we don't do, okay, other people do. And then now is, okay, then what is the relation between credit and the economy, okay? What is the relation between credit and growth? This is the most important part of the thing that we want to share with you, okay? In order to analyze this thing, if you analyze this thing by country, obviously it's a mess because thanks God, okay, we don't have so many recessions in every country, then it's going to be difficult, okay? Then basically we have a panel data, okay? A panel regression. Basically we use 200, we have at the end of the day in this panel, we are able to get 244 recession periods. Therefore, we think we have enough evidence to conclude something that is generalized, not only for one particular country, okay? Then let me give you the approach. What we are going to do is the following. GDP growth in the left-hand side, credit in the right-hand side, okay? Actually, variation in credit in the last 2 years, okay? In the right-hand side, okay? Something really, okay? And then we find that credit is significant in the right-hand side. It seems that too much credit has a negative effect on the economy, but we realize that this is only significant in the recession period, okay? Then basically credit, the evolution of credit is bad for the economy only in the bad times. In the good time, and actually this is what these guys are saying, okay? In the expansions, credit doesn't matter, okay? Okay, but what is the problem here? The problem is the following. It's just like, okay, this is just a 1 year ahead. This is a parallel regression, great, okay? But we want to go even further because at the end of the day, this is kind of short view. It's like the next year, but we want to say like how much, because at the end of the day, what we are looking in the graph, this huge increase in credit and a huge recession is just more than what's going to happen next year. We are talking about how is going to be the recession, given that I see a level of credit, because it's not a question of like just how deep is it going to be next quarter, but in general, we are talking about a long period of time of very bad growth, no? And the problem, what we are going to do is the following. Look, this is how economies grow, okay? You have an expansion period, and I'm going to talk about a few things. Duration of the expansion is like how long the expansion lasts. Amplitude is how, this is log of GDP, then is how, what is the percentage of GDP that we gain during the expansion period. And there is something called cumulation that is this area and represent basically the wealth that you gain because you have an expansion period. And then we have recession periods. Again, we have duration, amplitude, and this is the cumulation. Duration, amplitude, this is the cumulation. Duration, amplitude, this is the cumulation, okay? At the end of the day, basically what we want to measure is like, by the way, as you can see, the dating of the business cycle is key. I'm talking about the Spanish business cycle committee, okay? The dating of the business cycle is key in order to understand this process. Okay, but then I'm talking about how big is this area in comparison with how big is this area. This is what we care about. It's like how much wealth we gain because of the business during the business cycle. Okay, let's start talking about the recession periods. Okay, then how is going to be the recession associated with how we get into the recession? Remember, we have a huge increase in credit to GDP. We get into the final period of growth, and then how is going to be the recession associated with the building up of the vulnerabilities that you had during the expansion periods, okay? Okay, by the way, this is the most important variable because at the end of the day, during the recession period, credit is affected by most of the variation that we have comes from the fact that we have 200 recession periods, and therefore we can learn a lot about how we get into the recession periods and what are the features of the recession periods. Look at this thing. Okay, there is some relation between, okay, the variation in credit, how do you get into the recession period, and the duration, the amplitude and accumulation, but not that much. Then what we realize is that perhaps this relation is very nonlinear. And what we do is a quantile regression, okay? Look, in the worst recession, there is a lot of relation between credit and what happened with the recession, okay? And when you increase the quantile, okay, in the normal recessions, there is not that much relation between credit and, okay? Then the relation between credit and GDP is very nonlinear. And let me illustrate this thing with a very nice graph, I think. Okay, what we do is the following. These are different quartiles. Remember, we have 200 recession periods. Let me just talk about the ones that have a credit to GDP more crazy, okay? The biggest one, okay? The higher vulnerability. We are going to call this thing the fourth quartile. And the ones that get into the recession period with the lower vulnerability, we are going to call it first quartile, okay? Look, if you get into the recession with low vulnerabilities, okay, basically we are just a mixture of normals, you have a probability of 80% of losing 3% of your wealth during the recession period, and a probability of 20% of losing 20% of your wealth, okay? If you get in this quartile with this crazy credit to GDP, you have 58% of losing 6% of your wealth, and you have 42% of losing 30% of your wealth. Okay, you really don't want to get into the recession with this level of credit to GDP. Okay, then it's very clear that credit to GDP is bad for the recession periods. Okay, you have to control credit, and this is not new. This is something that we knew. Okay, what about expansions? I mean, nobody talks about the expansion. Who cares about the expansion? Okay, what we did was to repeat the same exercise. How do we get into the expansion? And okay, and we find nothing. Why? Because expansions are so long that how do you get into the expansion doesn't matter, because you know the important thing is how expansions evolve. Okay, and then what we do is to analyze one variable that is also very well known in the literature. It's called credit intensity. Okay, credit intensity is like the variation of credit to GDP from the beginning of the expansion until every period of the expansion. This is how your expansion has been fueled by credit. Okay, how much do you use credit in your economy? Okay, here the results that I'm going to present are for the full sample, but then we do this thing year by year, saying like, I am in the first year of an expansion. I look at credit intensity. What I expect for the second year? I go to the second year. I look at credit intensity. Okay, make sure that credit intensity is back information. Okay, but let me show you the results for the full sample. Okay, what is the relation between credit intensity and expansion? Look, credit intensity seems to matter for the duration of expansions, for the amplitude of the expansion, for the accumulation. Okay, but it doesn't seem to matter for the average growth. Okay, okay, we are going to repeat credit intensity in the expansion in relation to the following recession, but that's something very technical. Okay, okay, let's analyze how is an expansion. Expansion is a period like this. You have a duration and you have an amplitude. Okay, okay, what we are saying is like credit intensity matters for the duration. Okay, but then look, at the end of the day, amplitude is duration times average growth. Okay, then at the end of the day, we can calculate accumulation as 1/2 of the average growth in the expansions times the duration to the power 2. Okay, then basically duration is key. We find that there is no relation, and actually we find, and everybody talks about that there is no relation between credit and average growth rate in the expansion periods. Okay, fine. We find the same, but we are repeating what everybody is saying. There is no relation between average growth rate in the expansion and the evolution of credit. Fine, that's great. What about duration? Perhaps duration matters. Okay. Okay, look. How is duration of the expansion? Okay, this is the duration of the expansions. Okay, basically this is, if I am here, if I have 20 quarters of an expansion period, what is the probability of dying? Okay, okay, this is basically how duration of the probability of dying in every period of time evolves in the expansion period. But at the end of the day, what matters is like credit changes this probability of dying. Okay, basically we do the same thing that medical doctors do. Okay, when you are sick, okay, medical doctors look at different treatments and they analyze, okay, what is the probability of you dying, or what is the probability? Okay, then basically we do the same thing. We have 200 expansion periods. Every expansion period is treated by credit in different way, and we want to analyze the probability of the duration changes with the amount of credit that every economy or every expansion has taken. Okay, then obviously, first of all, we have to analyze what is the probability of dying without credit, okay, on average, and then how credit modify that probability of dying. Okay, look, really credit modify the probability of dying. We do basically we do a duration model. Okay, this is the probability of dying in every period of time, basically the probability of expansion ending as a function of credit. Okay. And obviously the evolution, the standard evolution of the probability of dying. Okay. Okay, credit matters. Credit, when you have more credit, you have less probability of dying. Okay. Okay, this is great because it seems that it's something new. Nobody has ever thought about that thing. And people that were saying that credit doesn't matter in the expansion, They were looking at average growth rate next year, but they were not looking at the probability of dying. Okay. Okay, look. This graph represents duration in the left-hand side, in the x-axis, and this is the probability of dying. What is the problem here? If you were trying to relate this thing in a linear framework, you will say to your students, okay, this is very nonlinear. If you are in this area, you have a probability of dying, I'm sorry, about a duration that is going to be low. If you are in this area, your duration is going to be higher. If you are in this area, perhaps even higher, and you don't want to get into this area, okay? It's a very nonlinear relation between credit intensity and duration of expansion, okay? This is the thing that we do. Imagine a very nonlinear relation in a very nonlinear framework because it's the probability of dying, okay? This is what we do. We analyze what is the probability of dying when credit intensity is low, when credit intensity in the second quartile, when credit intensity in the third quartile, and when credit intensity in the fourth quartile. And let me just show you the results. If you are in the first quantile, basically when credit is low, you have a probability of dying, but this probability of dying is multiplied by 40%. You have 40% more probability of dying than in normal cases. You don't want to live here because the probability of dying means the end of the expansion. It's 40% more than in the average. If you are in the second quartile, okay, you are basically in the average. If you are in the third quantile, your probability of dying is 35% less than the average. Okay, your expansions are going to be longer because you have less probability of dying. And if you are in the fourth quantile, look, you basically come back to the mean. You really want to live in the third quantile. Okay, because you have less probability of dying. Yeah, but who cares? Okay, actually what we do is also analyze, instead of having quartiles, we analyze the density function of a normal distribution in every period of time, okay, just to see a nonlinear relation, okay? But in general, this is with the normal distribution, but basically look at this thing. If you have very low credit to GDP variation, your expansions are not financed by credit, okay, your probability of dying is high, you reduce up to, let's say, around 45% of probability, okay, when you are in the middle, and then you increase again. But at the end of the day, what is the implication of this? Who cares? Look, you have less probability of dying, you are going to live longer, okay? In particular, if you are at the top of the distribution, basically you have credit very high or credit very low, your expected duration at the beginning of the expansion is going to be 25 quarters. If you have a nice evolution of credit, it's going to be around 40, okay? We are talking about 4 years of expansion. 4 years of expansion is a lot. I will show you later, okay? But really, credit matters a lot for the duration of the expansion, okay? In particular, if we are in the first quartile, we are going to live around 20 quarters. If we are in the second quartile, we are going to live around 25 quarters. If we are in the third quartile, we are going to live around 40, okay? Basically, this is the evolution of credit intensity. What we have here is credit intensity, and this is how long we are going to live. Okay, this is just the example of we do this thing, as I said, every year, because you can say credit intensity is endogenous. Okay, let's do this thing, okay, every year and see what's going to happen next year. Okay, we do this thing, and the graphs are similar, obviously with more noise, but the intuition is the same. Okay, okay, and then, okay, fine. Then we have seen that credit is bad for the recession, and we are the only ones that have said something good about credit. Okay, credit is good for the duration of expansion. How can we put this thing together? We want more credit or less credit? What is clear, I think, from this talk is that we don't want to live in the fourth quantile. Why? Because we have less duration than in the third quantile, and we are going to have worse recessions. It's clear that in the fourth quantile, we don't want to live. What about in the first quantile, in the second quantile, and the third quantile? Let me show you first some statistics that are extremely basic. Look, at the end of the day, what you want is to basically increase the accumulation over the business cycle. Okay, saying, remember, the expansions create wealth, the recession decrease wealth. Let me just put this thing together in every cycle and see, okay? This is what we want to do. Okay, look. Duration of expansion. So you are in the first quantile, and I'm not talking about econometrics here, I'm just counting, okay? If you are in the first quantile of credit, the intensity, you are going to live around in 20 quarters, in the second quantile 21, in the third quantile 30, and in the fourth quantile 28. Okay, we saw that. Okay, duration of recessions. Okay, these are going to be a little longer, but who cares? I mean, we are talking about, you know, we are talking about 9 years more of expansion versus 4, I mean, basically the same duration of recessions. What about the amplitude? We are going to, during the expansion period, you gain 28% of GDP, if you are in the third quintile. It's true that the recessions are a little bit bigger than this, but we are talking about 28 versus 4%, okay? Then in general, and then what we want to do, what we do is the following exercise. We are going to compare accumulation over the business cycle. We have 200 business cycles, and we are going to relate this thing with basically the 4 possible candidates that could help me to explain this thing. The duration of expansions, the duration of recessions, the average growth rate of expansions, or the average growth rate of recession, okay? Okay, duration of expansion explains 97% of the variance of accumulation of wealth. Basically, the idea is, yes, it's true that credit is bad for the recession, but order of magnitudes, but compared with the gains of having enough credit during the expansion, order of magnitude. We are like, oh my God, credit. Joder. Don't you forget something? Don't you forget that, thanks God, usually we are in the expansion period. Okay, then, okay, it's not a question of like, okay, let's kill credit. We need credit to expand the economy, okay? In particular, if you live in the first quintile, your average growth rate is going to be 5%. If you live in the second quartile, it's a little bit. If you are living in the third quartile, you have a huge average growth rate, okay? Obviously, you pay some increase in variance with respect to the first quintile. In the first quintile, you don't have variance, but you are dead all the time, okay? Okay, the frequency of recessions also decreases if you are in the third quintile, and basically the accumulation in the third quintile is way bigger. Okay, this is great, but what is the meaning of being in the third quintile? Okay, at the end of the day, credit intensity reflects some variation in credit over time. Okay, from the beginning, credit intensity is credit to GDP in the moment that you are talking about versus the beginning of the expansion period. What is the variation in credit to GDP? And basically what we find is like you want to be basically around 0% is the minimum, and the maximum that you want to have in a variation in credit to GDP is around 3% every year. Okay, in the moment that you are above 3%, you are getting into dangerous territory. Okay, the results are robust to a lot of things. We do a lot of things in the papers. Okay, and basically the conclusions. Economists face a growth at risk trade-off with respect to credit. Okay, you want to have some credit, and you have to worry a little bit about recessions, but make sure that you take into account the evolution of expansion. Credit growth increases the risk of a costly recession, but fits longer expansions. Okay, economies are in expansion most of the times, and the gains from these periods tend to overweight the size of the losses in the recession periods. Understanding the role of credit in expansion is key to assess the overall impact of credit dynamics in the real economy, and macroprudential policies should be used to balance this growth and risk trade-off. And that's what I want to say.
Questions? Gabriel?
Yeah. I have a question. If I understood everything about the credit, but if there is something which affects credit and therefore affects the recession, so in the sense that I know fever is bad, but fever is not the cause of sickness. It is the relationship. I mean, I don't know if there is something commented about that in the literature.
Okay, obviously the type of credit matters. Okay, and then we are analyzing the type of credit to household, credit to firms. Okay, what type of credit is more helpful or is more dangerous to the economy. But the point that we want, and then with respect to the evolution of credit and up to what point credit is linked or is not linked, basically your question is up to what point credit is being used to increase growth. Okay, the type of credit I think is the key solution to that. That we are working on that, basically analyzing the type of credit, and actually it's true that credit to firms have a more positive impact on growth than credit to household. Okay, in that sense, there is a clear distinction on that. But basically, in this case, the only point that we wanted to say is like there are millions of papers on credit is bad. Just make the point of like, okay, please be careful with this, because it's true that looking at the literature is like we had the same problem with the other paper. We wrote a paper on up to what point credit forecast recession periods, and then if credit forecast recession periods. So clearly, how we were so blind not to see that. And here is the same thing. If credit is so bad, why don't we kill credit completely? Okay, because if credit is no bad and nobody says anything good about credit, then we should kill credit. And the point of this paper is like, okay, man, in the expansions is not so, the relation of the expansion and credit is very subtle. Okay, it's very non-linear in a non-linear framework. Okay, but you cannot kill credit because you are going to have credit recoveries that are in the first quantile and you are going to die. Then your question should be what type of credit, okay? And that's something that we are working on right now. It's like analyzing.
Sorry, the type of credit and if there is something else which is affecting credit. So my point was that fever is bad, but it is not fever what causes to be sick.
Okay, actually in this case, this is no fever, credit is good, okay? Then your kid is growing up nicely. No, but if it grows up a lot, then it's going to have it's going to have a hurt in the back. Okay, but it's growing up nicely. Okay, in this case, credit is good for the economy. What is behind credit? Though? This is the thing. Macroprudential policy has a power to control credit. Okay, then in that sense, we have to play with macroprudential policies in order to control the evolution of credit over time, and we have power to do that. Okay, but then at the end of the day, it's just like make sure that you use these tools. Actually, we have learned a lot about monetary policy over time because monetary policy is very old. But macroprudential policy, we learn about the possibility of these things basically after the financial crisis, and we are still trying to figure out what to do with the tools. Okay, should we increase loan to value? Should we decrease loan to value? This is something that we are still learning about, and this is an illustration of like we should play with this thing. There is some relation between what you do with macroprudential policies and the effect on credit, but make sure that you do this thing wisely. You don't want to kill credit. Okay.
That was very good. Thank you. So thinking about I have three comments. So one is going to the composition of credit. So if you go to BIS data, you're not going to have data on what the financial system is doing. So if you look at the credit evolution for Spain, what you show there, I think, is private sector, non-financial. Exactly. You include intra-financial private liabilities. You're going to start almost from the same value, and you're going to go into the crisis in almost 5 times GDP, which is huge. I'm kind of wondering whether you think that this could have an importance.
Okay.
Then the second one is about the metrics here, right? Because this credit to GDP is a stock over flow, which should be some kind of profit and losses value added, but it really is not. I mean, it is, but it's very disconnected from credit as being only referred to the private non-financial sector. So I don't know if you think that, I mean, already in the metric that we want to have, like loan to value, macroprudential is very clearly going to the balance sheet and the cash flows associated with what they want to control. But credit to GDP, so narrow in the credit and so broad on the denominator, stock and flow is, I don't know. I feel it's really suboptimal.
I understand you.
Last one. You say that I mentioned it before, right? So, I mean, do you think that there is any importance for monetary policy in these relations?
Obviously.
Let's cut it short.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Actually, yes. Okay. With respect to the measure, we are not using credit to GDP, we're using variation in credit to GDP, okay? Saying credit intensity is where you are at the beginning, where are you in the moment of time, okay? I understand your point about credit being I2 versus GDP being I1, okay? Basically order of magnitude, okay? But the only thing that we can say is like, in this case, we are forecasters. Then even in real time, basically in real time saying like only considering the evolution of the first year, the second year, and the third year, we find some predictive power, okay? With respect to the non-stability of credit to GDP over time, we actually have a whole paper analyzing how to implement this thing. Okay, this is our paper about the failure to forecast GDP recession. And basically we do this thing in a nonlinear framework. We do the right transformation when they are stationary, and we find that there's still some predictive power of these variables on future turning points. Then we are forecasters in the sense we step back and saying, okay, there is some predictive power, we can get something from this. With respect to the relation between macroprudential policies and monetary policy, there is a discussion paper at the ECB on the relation. Alberto, your co-author, Alberto Martin, on the relation between macroprudential policies and monetary policy. And obviously there is, at the end of the day, there are some trade-offs, there are some feedbacks, okay, but that's away from the scope of this paper that is basically analyzing this particular point. Okay? And what we were surprised is up to what point the literature is blind, is concentrated on episodes, saying like what happened during the financial crisis, forgetting the normal times that, thanks God, are the normal. Okay, and then the point here is. Good. That's okay. That's great. Okay, that's something that we should explore in more detail. Okay, I agree completely on that.
Thanks, Gary. This is maybe a geeky question, but you mentioned before endogeneity. Is there any kind of Lucas critique here? Did you say we want to live in the third quartile of credit?
Yeah.
What would have happened, or what data would have had if 50 years ago, we have been in that quartile for since the beginning?
Okay, that's again. That's okay. First of all, with respect to the endogeneity, we care about endogeneity using only known variables before. Okay, let's say we go to the first year, we analyze credit intensity in the first year, we try to forecast the second year. We go to the second year, we analyze credit intensity, we forecast the third year. Then in that sense, we use predetermined variable in order to forecast the future. Up to what point, if we all know this thing, the economy could change and then we will have a different setup. And that's again above the scope of this analysis. It is something that the only thing that we are doing is trying to show some stable relations across 250 expansion periods, and saying like, okay, what happened if we are all aware of this thing and we basically change our behavior? That's completely, we don't know. We actually don't know. I cannot answer that question. Okay. We are just showing some empirical relations that are solid, that are unknown. And what can you do with this thing, or what kind of models can be written according after this empirical relation is something that we don't know how to do because we are empirical. Okay. We are econometricians.
I would like to thank Gabby for your excellent lecture. That has been very.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
It's been
much.
a pleasure
Thank
to have you here. And also, since this is the last lecture in the conference, I would like to thank again Xavier and Barcelona for the excellent organization, and we have been able to enjoy also very great presentations. So thank all of you for your contribution, and hopefully we will meet again next year in Valencia. So we wait for you there for another very good conference.
Thank
And
you.
thank you also, Lola.